Welcome back to Troubled, a podcast by survivors of institutional abuse for survivors and the general public. As always, from now until forever, there is a heavy trigger and content warning on everything. Especially if you're a survivor yourself, please put your mental health first. I know that I myself, the way I deal with my trauma is to deep dive, binge as much content as I can find. This can be incredibly triggering for me, but it is the way that I deal with things. And sometimes I myself have to take breaks, as you've seen with the podcast many times. Please do the same for yourself. Please utilize your support systems. This next episode that you're about to hear was one of the most difficult for me personally, as this is about the program that I was at and the pedophile that we are going to be talking about, who is named and in multiple New York Child Victims Act cases that are open today. And if you were sexually abused at any time by anyone anywhere in the state of New York, you do have a one-time temporary lift on the statute of limitations. The people that you are going to hear from, the Liz's from the family, they are both currently active in cases against our program for being brutally sodomized as children. We will be talking about those subjects. So that's just a heads up on the extreme nature in which we talk about a trigger warning. If you listen to episodes 2 and 3 of season 1 of this podcast, My Story, you'll hear about the Music Man. I personally escaped being a Me Too in this situation because of the courage and bravery of a 17-year-old girl warning me of this pedophile and imploring me to find a way to get out of his choir before I too became a victim. And I owe everything to her. We're still in contact. I love and respect her greatly. You'll hear all about it if you go listen to those episodes, or if you already have. This is the courage of children, you guys. And again, thank you for your support. Please continue to support us. Please share this information. Please help us stop this predator who, for the record, since the closure of the Family Foundation School in Hancock, New York, continued to work with children, to work with church choirs, and to go on and work in education. And this is why we have to continue to chase these people and come forward with our truth over 20 years later for some of these people that you're about to hear from. And this is why it's important. It's not about getting our story out or triggering ourselves by reliving our trauma. It's about saving the children of today and saving the children of tomorrow. And the family school was run by pedos. He was not the only one. You've heard of a couple others on our podcast already, but this guy is possibly, with a 30-year free reign on children at this program hidden in the mountains, is possibly the most prolific pedophile predator. I'm just tripping over the magnitude of this, you guys, since he had absolutely no preference for gender, age, like anything, nothing, no preference at all. He was just, terrorizing our campus. So if you're still with us, please take this at your own risk and in your own time. And then if you can assist us in moving forward and stopping this and many of the others, please reach out. So I'm just pre-apologizing on all the Liz on Liz derps that we're about to do for the next hour or 10. We've obviously got Liz Iannelli from the family school back here. This is our third family school three-way call, and I'm just gonna let Liz Iannelli just intro other Liz.
Okay, so today on today's Avengers episode, we have Liz Boysick. She is definitely been a friend of mine since we started planting the tree about 4 years ago. She was the first female sexual assault survivor to come forward alongside myself in the New York Times article. And she was the first person to call out who we will be referring to as the Music Man. I'm pretty sure that every family school alumni knows who we're talking about, but we're just, like, thou shall not be named. And so to just get a background for what we're doing today, Liz Boysick is being incredibly courageous and coming forward. When we met, Liz was in a space where she was very, how do I say it? like we can just like love it out. Everything's gonna be okay. And, she was very quiet and broken and kind of fragmented and suffering. And we ended up just by accident disclosing to each other that we both had been brutally sexually assaulted at the family school, but by different staff members. And that lit a match that kind of started a wildfire, and it's been blazing out of control. So Liz has really been kind of the vanisher member of the Avengers team. She's been a shadow warrior for a very long time and behind the scenes, and this is really her coming out party, and she's coming out, right, literally, to somewhat name her abuser, the Music Man, and she's going to talk about what happened to her and the impact that it had and why she's coming forward now to what she wants other survivors to know. And she's going to tell her story, and this is real stuff. So there is a trigger warning that's going to come with this podcast in general. But Liz Boysick is a badass, and she didn't know it until she found her own voice. So you can also check out her Breaking Code of Silence photo and poster that she put up just last night. So welcome to Music Man, Join the Black Parade.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I appreciate the venue to talk about these very important issues that not a lot of people really know about. Like you said before, a lot of what people are talking about is, the Catholic Church and Boy Scouts, and there's a whole group of survivors from the troubled teen industry that are hardly ever acknowledged. And I think it's time that we discuss, what happened to us and how we're going to move forward and take the power back,
Yeah, absolutely. And you two ladies, thank you seriously personally, because as a second generation, or the next generation from you guys, because I guess you're the middle generation of the family school. Before the New York Times article, I literally referred to this as my fancy boarding school in the mountains. The cognitive dissonance was real. And this podcast exists, as, a way for me to hold on and do something with this pain instead of literally self-destruct. So I do see you guys as lighting that path and lighting the way on it. So it's incredible to have this conversation, as difficult as it's going to be. So thank you.
Well, thank you for holding space for us. So, we can do this and show other survivors what healing looks like. We deserve, as survivors, peace of mind, safety. And I feel it's time that we take that back and really show up in force for our brothers and sisters that we lost, and for the brothers and sisters that are still suffering every day. And it's unacceptable what our experiences were. And, it's time to hold the troubled teen industry accountable.
Amen.
And you're both, yeah, obviously you guys are front and center with the whole New York Supreme Court with the Child Victims Act. How does one even begin? Liz had mentioned some details on that, so we won't in the last episode, so you guys just check that out. But with you guys, when you personally approach this, how does one begin, and what is that journey like? I can't imagine that that's easy.
No, it hasn't been easy. When I came, out the first time in the New York Times article, I was new to Survivor Land. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but I felt like there's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of sexual assault victims from just this one, troubled teen program. And I came forward hoping that it would encourage other survivors to come forward and show, tell their stories and their experience. So it's no longer something we have to hide with. Toxic shame is a real thing. And part of coming out in the Times article was releasing some of the shame I felt. And after it dropped, I really did feel kind of vulnerable and naked. And I wanted to support the cause, but not up front and center. But now it's 2 years later, and the landscape has really changed, and there's a lot more attention given to the troubled teen industry, gay conversion therapy programs, wilderness boot camps. And as a survivor of the troubled teen industry, I feel part of my personal responsibility to say, A, this happened to us, B, it was not okay, and C, we're going to take the power back, and nobody's going to ever have control over us again.
Okay, everyone. So we're going to be shifting this next segment towards some really graphic and disturbing accounts of sexual assault. And Liz Boysick is bravely taking this opportunity to come forward and name her abuser, the Music Man. She was in the New York Times and had noted that she had been sexually abused in the infamous barn that was located on the property. And this is really her moment of coming forward and telling people what happened to her. And Music Man has been infamously known for sexually being inappropriate and or abusing boys. There are Child Victim Act cases on file. Multiple cases filed here in New York name Music Man as a perpetrator or an accomplice too. So Liz Boysick is very unique in this case, as she is the first female sexual victim to come forward naming the Music Man, and she is, to the best of her ability, going to try and describe what happened to her in the hopes that other survivors hear her story and either unfortunately relate, but perhaps they will have enough bravery and strength to come forward. And if anyone knew Liz a year or 2 or 3 ago, to be at this point to actually come forward is like nothing short of badassery and bravery and complete courage. So I ask everyone to be respectful and hold space for her as she tries to share an account, voluntarily share her story. So I'm going to put my phone on mute. And Liz Boysick, the floor is yours. And we are encouraging others, if they have been abused by the Music Man, to join the Black Parade.
As you know, I'm Liz Boysick, and I was at the Family Foundation School, and I am the first female to report being sexually assaulted by the Music Man. And I'm sorry if some of this is going to sound weird, but I'm like literally breaking out in hives right now about talking about this, because it's obviously something I've only discussed with close, friends and some family members. But other than that, I haven't been talking about this. And I hope you guys can understand if this is a little disjointed or choppy. When we arrived, or when I arrived at the family school, there were 2 very high member staffs, the principal and the Music Man. And I know that she knew that the Music Man was abusing us, and I feel that she was participating in making children available to be sexually abused by the Music Man, because the Music Man provided the family school with something they needed, which was credibility. And when you have pictures of musicals and chorus stuff and trophies for choral competitions, it brings some legitimacy to an otherwise illegitimate school. And I feel that Music Man was invaluable to the structure of the cult that we lived in, and was able to operate freely within the confines of the very isolated campus we had in the middle of the Catskills. Initially, when I first got to the family school, my parents made it known to the administration that I was really into music. And, at the time I had been, taking voice lessons and singing opera and doing all that stuff. And I immediately was exploited for those talents and put in all of the singing groups. And either by design or accident, I was being put in contact with my abuser for when we were practicing for choral performances for almost 20 hours extra a week outside of school. And from the very beginning, this staff member was highly sexualized and would talk about his masturbation habits and how he almost got in a car accident while masturbating while eating a cheeseburger. And that's a pretty famous story that is known throughout all of the, times that the staff member was there. And I'm not sure what made me, prime. I don't know. How do you say? I'm not sure what made me enticed. I'm not sure what the word is. I'm not sure why this man was attracted to me, but he was. And in the beginning, he would make comments and ask me about my personal masturbation habits. And he would go on long rants in choral practice about how our sound was not pure enough, and that it wasn't pure because people were masturbating. And then he would go through the line of people pointing at them, did you masturbate? And then if you had rosy cheeks just for being embarrassed about an adult talking to you in this very derogatory way, you were bullied, and you were said that you're thinking about sex, you're not paying attention. And then he would also do this thing where if a girl had larger breasts, he was so delusional that he would say that these 14, 15, 16-year-old girls were actually, pointing their breasts at him in order to entice him sexually, and would shame regularly, girls in chorus and accuse them of doing something that they weren't. So in the meantime, within, a couple months of me being there, it went from, talking about all this sexual stuff to touching and, grabbing my ass and doing some other things that would either make you think that it could be accidental, or we were so trained to, I don't know, trust these people completely, that even though I know what he was doing by just touching me was wrong, I didn't really know if it was wrong, if that makes any sense, because so much of the normal I knew before, the day I stepped in the family, when your rules change so dramatically, you begin to question reality. And I have to say my abuser was very smart. He made it sure that to never, be seen with me, privately, or just, one-on-one. He would abuse me. And then um, I would have to go and go to prayer circle and act like nothing happened. And it was just torture. It was psychological torture. And, you know, he sodomized me, and this happened in the barn and also in the dorm room, as we were forced to live in this man's basement. Um, sorry. For me to explain the next part, I have to explain why I haven't had a single night of decent sleep in the last 20 years. When I was at the family, my dorm was in the basement of the Music Man's house. And the only thing separating 16 girls that lived in his basement from him was a door. And supposedly this door had a lock. But, I don't believe there was one, because obviously, in my time into the family, I was awoken by the Music Man and told to go into this like boot closet thing. And once I was in that boot closet, I was brutally sodomized, and I then had to go back and sleep in that bed with a thin door, knowing my abuser is literally right overhead. And the terror that came with that was indescribable. I used to feel before this happened some type of safety when we would reach the dorm. I couldn't be brought up at the dorm, or at least it wasn't a common occurrence to be brought up at the dorm. So, in my traumatized mind, something, my little piece of sacred space was defiled. And from that time on, I literally haven't slept a peaceful night's sleep since that day. And, this would happen again. And, I wasn't just abused once or twice. It was multiple times throughout the entire stay, of the 408 days I spent there. And it wasn't just that, but before my 18th birthday, the head of the school, a really sick individual, told me that if I left on my 18th birthday, that, I was going to end up dead or in jail or a prostitute or in a psych ward, whatever. But in that same meeting about what I was going to do when I turned 18, I was literally threatened by the head of the school at that time. And she was going through my binder with my information, my, parents' addresses and all of that stuff. And I'll never forget the sadistic look on her face as she licked her finger and paged through that binder with all my personal information, and told me that, nobody would believe me if I got any ideas about, saying anything about what was happening. And, the threat was real in my mind. I fully thought that they were capable of hurting my family. And for the next almost 10 years, I would tell nobody about my sexual abuse. Nobody. And I did that as much protection for me as for the people I loved, because I truly felt having been brainwashed that the staff at this school, or so-called school, but it's not, it's a cult, had real life consequences and real life implications to my family. And we were silenced. And I know there are other victims that were silenced. And I know that probably somebody is listening to this podcast right now and saying, holy shit, I'm not the only one, and it's been really difficult coming out as the only female survivor of this guy, because he is known to have preferences for, teenage boys. But I feel, whoever was available and was in the right place at the right time was fair game. And to any of the people out there who were abused by the Music Man or any other staff, now is really our time as sexual assault victims to come forward and demand the justice that we deserve. It doesn't matter if it's been 20 years. It doesn't matter if it's been 40 years. If you were under 18 and abused in the state of New York, you have until January to file a civil suit against your abusers. And I hope that in some small way, this podcast may give someone the courage to speak up and say, hey, this happened to me too. And hey, I'm not going to let these people get away with it. And I'm not going to live in the mental bondage anymore. And I'm taking my power back as a survivor. And to you guys that are hearing this stuff for the first time, I'm sorry that you have to hear this, because I know that we know the troubled teen industry is a fucked up place, but I'm not sure people really understand how terrible the family school was, and time to make it known. And I hope that this helps in some way.
But as far as the grooming, I know that you brought it up, and I just want to point into one particular incident that is pretty haunting for me personally. I get, it's just, per your point about other adult staff members and this principal knowing, being complicit and proactively assisting a prolific pedophile in creating this grooming breeding ground for this kind of abuse. There was a situation with a slow dance, and are you comfortable relaying that to the audience that doesn't exist but's in our head right now?
Yeah, and I don't know why this is harder for me to divulge, other than this was the most diabolical thing you could do to someone, which was I was being sexually abused by this man in power, and I had to have contact with him because I was in all the music things, and he made me slow dance with him in front of the chorus to say that he was demonstrating something, but nothing ever felt more humiliating than that. And in a way, I felt like he was trying to maybe romanticize in his head what was going on, and I found that very disturbing. And I still really that was a huge violation, to not only be abusing me behind closed doors, but then to openly call me out like that. And just always the teacher's pet, always making me perform like a trained monkey. And it was very demoralizing, and to this day I say it was worse than the original abuse, because it was a total breach of reality. And we're all we were already living in a twilight zone, but this was like, for a long time afterwards, I could never like really understand why he would choose to do that. You know, when he had been so careful to not be alone with you know, like, you know, try to avoid seeing alone with me, but then to do that in, you know, front of everybody, like it just was like so dirty. And, you know, I have to live with that. I have to you know, live with that feeling of that guy, like being like, you know, held like that. Like it's really disgusting and demoralizing, and part of his sick game of wanting to be in power at all times. And I don't really think any of the abuse was really about sex as much as it was about power. And you know, I really felt that the staff there, not just Music Man, but the staff in general, really got off on completely breaking down these young kids, some as young as 12, you know, just being completely dehumanized. And like there's stuff that I haven't even talked about. Like there could be a whole nother podcast of this stuff that I haven't even mentioned yet. But I mean, just to imagine that there's, you know, thousands of people around the country that are willing to work in these places that regularly, you know, break these kids, break them physically, spiritually, emotionally. And, you know, I hate to say it, we did experience, you know, physical, sexual abuse there, but the worst abuse that was ever occurred at our program and any troubled teen industry is, you know, the mental that we have to live, the mental stuff, the way they berated us. And, you know, constantly, like the message was, you're not okay, you're not going to be okay, your life is going to be a failure. You know, there was no chance to be your authentic self. So, you know, we're in this position where we're constantly having to confess to imaginary things and make up imaginary problems. And there's no way to leave a place like that where you're so thoroughly brainwashed um, without any damage. And that's not okay.
So, gotta wipe the tear. It's not okay. And correct me if I'm wrong, Liz's, but other pets of the Music Men, aren't some of our sisters and brothers already gone that were pets of his?
Yes.
It's multiple.
Yes.
And
his patterns are the same from what we can extract from cases that are on file. His, I guess if we were going to profile his behavior, slow dance tells us a few things. One, that he was comfortable. Two, that he was too, I hate the word powerless, but he's a sick individual. He was reliving or trying to have a corrective emotional experience and was using Liz Boysick to live out a fantasy of his, meaning to have a romantic, or what he would view as a romantic slow dance, almost mimicking being at prom, or, you know, let's face it, he was likely a social outcast, and he was an odd duck to begin with. So for him to mimic a very normal, romanticized fantasy in front of other students tells us that he's comfortable, that he is reliving a fantasy, that he was fucking with Liz's head by trying to normalize that they were in some kind of mutual relationship, especially in a dance, and a slow dance in particular. The male is often leading that dance. So it's also a display, extreme display of power and authority. But it's in their mind sickly softened. And he most certainly I wasn't there for the slow dance. I don't need to be. But you bet your ass that he probably finished that slow dance and went and masturbated in a closet somewhere to release the fantasy that he had created. And that's what pedophiles, they do. Pedophilia is not simply the sexual deviant act. It is their response to their behaviors. And we don't know if he took pleasure or pain in punishing himself afterwards for what he had done, or if he was too indulgent in the pleasure center of his brain, knowing what he was doing to a young child. We're not in his head. It could have been either or both. But pedophilia is not just the deviant sexual act. They act out in a variety of ways. And he is a man who lacks great conscience, lacks remorse, and is unable to control his impulses to sexually prey on young children, male and female. He does not discriminate, which is an interesting category. Pedophiles generally have a preference. The most dangerous, I'll go on record to say, are those like Music Man, who have no preference except for their preferred characteristic. Swipe right is vulnerability and opportunity. And that is what and who Music Man is.
Anybody else slightly triggered by the connotations of the use of the term man for a character such as this? Like, because I knew this quote unquote man as well personally. And there was nothing in that masculine identity, what I see as a man or who I experience as that. This is a really pathetic character. If everybody's cool with it, I'm definitely using a picture of him for cover art so people can actually see what we're talking about, because I think you can just see it looking at him, exactly the extent of the character that's there.
Right. Or lack thereof. I mean, he had no character.
Yeah.
But he definitely has traits that he was unable and unwilling to control. And what better playground to have than the family school drop dead center and 80-something acres away from the world where he could be a superstar. And again, they took a nobody, a music school prodigy, and they linked him up with kids and gave him free rein. So, it became a playground. And Liz Boysick is not the only one.
And you guys, like, just so it's very, very fucking clear, this was a complete open secret, if there is such a thing. Everybody on campus knew what this man was doing. Everyone. Okay? And I really feel that staff, higher ups were well aware of what he was doing and giving him free rein on us so he could, perform in the propaganda, of that school. And, this is no secret. This is known fact. Like, you could look this guy up for the last 20 years and you will find everything about him on the internet. There's not one nice thing there to say about him, and they're all the same. This is a highly sexualized person. He is obsessed with talking about sex. I mean, just think about how odd it is as like a 16-year-old kid to roll up in a supposed boarding school and then have people, almost twice your age asking you about your personal masturbation habits and stuff. I mean, this is like crazy. Like, this is cuckoo stuff. Like, the way the school operated was insane. I mean, it's incredible what these people have gotten away with so far, and I can't say it enough. We have to make these people accountable, and just like we were, like paraded around and forced to take our moral inventory all the time, the tables are turned. These people are going to have to make a searching and fearless inventory of their own. And they're going to have to look in the mirror and live with the choices they've made. And it may have taken 20 or 30 years, but we've came forward and we're not going anywhere.
So you're the 8th family school person to come on the podcast. So we've really, most of our listeners already kind of have a visual idea of, the bones, the structure, and some of the daily life of stuff and some of that. House brother and myself had talked at length. I'm just like, let's just go. Let's just do this. And Liz Ionelli had also brought up the kittens when she was at the program. Are you comfortable talking about the animal stuff? Because as an animal rescuer, I feel like, this kind of trauma, if they'd done these kinds of things in the Boy Scouts, we would have had this conversation 30 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, one thing besides having to be forced to, attack our peers was the second worst thing for me as an animal lover was being forced to abuse the animals that we were taking care of. And when I was there, every family had a pig, and part of your treatment or punishment was taking care of these pigs, and we were literally forced to feed these pigs pork and bacon and sausage, and to watch those pigs be cannibalized, it really it disturbs me, and I feel guilty personally to this day that I did that to something that can't speak for itself, and it's very disturbing. I mean, other survivors at least can speak up when they feel ready, but to do this to an animal and to be basically feeding these pigs their friends, it was very disturbing. And it was very disturbing, when they would say that they would take these animals after we fed them for so long to, get, processed and everything. And they would be like, oh, this is your buddy, and it was, psychological torture. They made us name these animals. They made us take care of them. And I say take care of, I mean, that's obviously kind of gross because we were forced to cannibalize these pigs. And, we did the best we could, having been powerless and, in the middle of the woods. But, to save a few bucks to not feed, the pigs the proper, food or whatever they need. And instead just give them the slop that was left over for the meals. It was just very, very disturbing to me. And, I still feel guilty about it 20 years later. And, I feel bad about that. I really do.
Liz Ionelli, I wonder if there are listeners who are like, feeding pigs they knew is really not a big deal because the pigs didn't know the pigs. From a psychology perspective, is there any chance that the people at the family school that were forcing Liz Boyzik and other students to do this, it was just like a random thing? This was just the leftover food. There was no psychological intent. They didn't know what they were doing. Is that possible?
No, not at all. This is a classic play on mind control. Not only does it represent the children, and then I loosely associate them as students of this program, being forced or forced to bond with an animal. The bonding with animals is one of the strongest bonds, other than with your own children, really, that you can have. So to take children under extreme emotional distress and introduce them to a comfort measure, and then psychologically mess with them and to reframe the narrative and then feed them the very animals they were forced to bond with, sent a very clear message that anything was disposable. And a known trait of sociopaths, true sociopaths, many of the research that's based on sociopaths' behavior are identified by harming animals in childhood and progressing forward. So these were very sociopathic tendencies to have children bond with animals, then be fed the animals that they had been caring for, breaking that bond, causing issues of abandonment and guilt and fear, and then having to ingest that, and as we know, the family, if children vomited, they'd have to eat it. Like there was no choice. Like, so, and I know that happened for a fact, even, and Liz Boycek can give a quick story on that, but the psychological warfare is really what took place. And then to have the students have to then feed the bacon or sausage of the animals that they raised and bonded with back to the new set of animals. This was a very torturous cycle that took an extreme mental toll. And like Liz Boycek said, 20 years later, the guilt and shame is still there. So there's no way that action was created by accident.
Yeah, and to be quite honest, I mean, I literally just cried about those pigs like a couple weeks ago. Like it came, I've known it happened, but I never really thought about it. And then one day it just like, I mean, it really hit me how diabolical it truly is to force, young children to bond with these animals and then basically desecrate them in such a terrible way. And I felt like it was like a double entendre. We were powerless, from the treatment we were getting from the staff, and the pigs were, had to accept what we did to them. They were, powerless over what care they received. It was just like a big, mind fuck. And I really truly regret that to this very day.
Well, Liz Ionelli, for these things that we did under duress and coercion and for survival as children, I understand there's still a lot of guilt and shame. I understand this personally, right? But like, what is that psychologically? Because like, how is Liz Boycek even responsible? Like, she had no other choice. We all know what they would have done to her if she didn't.
Right. And so it's really under the category of forcible coercion. She had no choice but to commit these heinous acts and had full awareness of what she was doing, but they, by design, left them powerless to change the narrative or not comply. So that has long-lasting effects. And the same way that if it's any reflection of how the family approached treating animals, you can only imagine then, animals aren't really able to give any feedback other than affection or pain. And the same applications were applied to the students at the program, because you either, were shown gaslighting or given the impression that you had a moment of safety, perhaps, or that maybe somebody cared about you, but it was like fake. And then the other side of it was that we were all being tortured and abused by the staff. So if you're willing to mistreat animals, the feedback from children is much more extensive, and the pleasure center of those causing pain, their brains would light up basically, because as children, we gave much more of an emotional response that was more visible and verbal. So it's really represents the multitude of the mind control and the debauchery that they incited for everyone.
Yeah, and just a reminder, you guys, we all had to eat everything on our plate, regardless of our previous dietary restrictions or preferences. And so hunger strikes, like my own, were pretty common. And especially when the pig meat came back. When the pig meat came back and was served to the family the first day, a lot of the kids that would later actually study veterinary science and things of that nature, went on hunger strikes, were put on exile and work sanction, and yada yada. Hey, Liz Boycek, was there a little whisper from other Liz over here that you're also one of my buddies in the Eat Your Own Vomit Brigade?
Well, no, actually, I'm not. I just literally witness it right next to me, and obviously that's like a common tactic that was used against us in the family school. And besides, being forced to eat things that we didn't like and then vomiting it up and then having to eat the vomit back, and watching that, it's fucking terrible and terrifying to watch that as a teenager. I mean, as anybody, but especially as a teenager, I just remember how powerless I felt sitting next to this person who never ate chicken and their whole life, and they were being forced to eat chicken pot pie. I remember that it was like yesterday, and you know, he tried to keep it down, but he couldn't, and so you know, he threw up, and then it was like, you're gonna eat that, and you know, we really didn't have any choice. And also, like, you know, I don't know what's been talked on the podcast before, but you know, food deprivation was real at the family school. I lost 50 pounds when within the first 6 months that I was at the family school, and I was getting so desperate for food because you know, we were also being forced to, you know, do manual labor, forced to do exercises. And then they would, for me, they gave me half portions. And so we're expending all this energy. And I mean, I was literally starving. And so I did steal mayonnaise packets and eat them and hide them in my pillowcase at night to try and get some extra calories. Like, you know, and then I also was on the restrictive diet when I was in isolation and getting out of isolation, where it was plain mapo for breakfast and tuna, plain tuna on an English muffin and a thing of fruit, you know, like a fruit and a glass of water for, you know, lunch and dinner. And, you know, I really, I still have food issues to this day, you know, regarding, you know, the deprivation that I experienced, you know, in my, you know, first experience of ever really truly feeling hunger, you know, where your stomach is hurting and it's keeping you up at night because you're so hungry. You know, and that's also another way that they exerted control over us was the food and also the sleep. I don't think I slept one night's sleep at that place. You know, just, you know, you were never safe. And most of my time there was spent wondering when the next hit was coming because we knew it was coming. We just didn't know when. I'm not sure if many of you know how long the New York Times article took to, you know, make happen, but just so you know, behind the scenes, that article took a full 9 months to make come forward. And I'd like to talk about the pictures that were in the article. If you saw the 2-page spread inside the magazine, it showed the barn, and that was where the abuse began for me. And Mike Wilson put that there as a big fuck you to Music Man. And honestly, I should thank him because I hope every day since that article came out 2 years ago that Music Man has been waiting for somebody to knock on his door and ruin his world, because he's on notice. We're coming for you, and we're taking back what's ours.
You know, I know that it's like, as you had said, it's he's known for a prevalence for teenage boys. I've spoken with a lot of my brothers about their experience with the Music Man, and his predatory shit from the sexaholics groups that he set up. I don't know if you listened through my sitting in my car for 8 hours episodes, but I was actually spared your abuser because a choir star that did my intake let me know that even though my parents had sent me here for this awesome choir stuff, because I'd been in show choir for years, yada, yada, that I no longer did choir, and saved me. So thank you, Lisa, again, for saving me from him. But I think you're going to save a lot more kids from him, because forgive me if I'm wrong, But even after the family school, hasn't he gone on to continue attempting to work with children?
Listen, the one of the biggest reasons that I came forward, besides getting my say, I found out that that sicko was working with children in a different state, and that bothered me too tremendously. And I wouldn't be surprised if there are children in other states that have been abused, as he's used his musical talents to constantly put himself, um, in with young children, whether it be boys or girls or whatever, whoever is available to him. He has a sickness, and there is no cure for that sickness. And there had been times over this really almost 20-year period where I felt incredibly guilty because the day I ran away from the family school with nothing but the clothes on my back, I was picked up by an officer after I had waited in a ditch at the end of March, lying down in a ditch waiting for the church van to go by because I didn't want to be kidnapped and taken back into the school. So it's the end of March, March 25th, 2001 was my freedom day. It was 3 days after my birthday, and I said, fuck this. I had enough. I left with just the clothes on my back, and I knew that the church choir van that I used to go in to Hancock to sing at the Catholic Church every Sunday would be coming by. And in the past, I've seen, been in that van while we took people that ran away back to the school. So I had a very real fear of being kidnapped, and I laid in a drainage and I waited because I knew the van would be coming soon. And like literally peeking my head out of the drainage ditch, I see the van slow at the end of the street, and it slowed down, it stayed a second, and then it left. And like I waited probably like a half an hour later just to even like get up and to like walk down there, because as far as I knew, that they were everywhere. I didn't know. I was very paranoid at the time. And anyways, I walked down to that main route. I think it's 97, and I was eventually picked up by a Hancock police officer. And he's like, the school asked me to take you back, but obviously you're 18 and it's up to you. And I said, I'm not going back. And he said, well, I can't just leave you here. So like the only thing I can do for you is offer you a ride into town to McDonald's in Hancock. And so I'm in the back of the police car now, and the cops like saying stuff like, what goes on there? Like, we're constantly returning kids there. Like, people run away from, there, and we have to pick them up and bring them back a lot. And that was true. Kids would run away, and the cops would find them and bring them back. Like, it was routine. And the cop asked me, hey, what goes on there? Like, why are so many kids running away? And being like, I think extremely like shell shocked, I just remember like repeating over and over, it wasn't good, like almost like a mantra, like it wasn't good, like what was happening there. And he was like trying to get me to elaborate, and I honestly just didn't have the words to verbalize what my experience was. Like you said, cognitive dissonance. I, up until, the last probably, 6 years or so, starting to call this program what it really is, a cult, but before that, it was a boarding school. So when I had told people in the past boarding school, they had this notion of like a rich, nice boarding school where everything's like honky-dory, and what we really were at was a cult where children were moved around across state lines for sexual abuse and human sex trafficking. So, you know, I felt like I had to do something, and even if it was late, I still came forward, and that's what I'm doing again.
I'm not sure
I
there
don't want.
is a late. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just morally, I felt like I had the obligation to come forward again, not just for me, but for other people that don't have a voice yet.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, Liz Ionelli, but 10 years is pretty standard, or 15 years for me and a lot of others, to even start reframing what happened to us.
Generally, trauma, and especially in a child's brain, biologically, brains were not done fully forming yet. So with the risk of sounding like a complete nerd, the hippocampus and the amygdala part of your brain, those are really the control centers for fight or flight. They control how much adrenaline and cortisol and stress hormones are released into your body. So our brains were hardwired very young to respond to trauma. And so essentially our brain, the switch was left on, and many of us have struggled to turn it off. But it's a biological component. So trauma rears its ugly head. Generally, there's no specific right time that it comes out, but it can be suppressed. I mean, PTSD can have an acute onset. It can have a delayed onset. There are, especially complex PTSD, there is a very delayed onset of understanding not only symptoms, but understanding of where this behavior and pattern and things are coming from. So there's no instantaneous really response. And it takes many survivors of sexual trauma years, decades, to not only recognize that what happened to them was abuse, but to actually come forward is another monumental step as well. So, that's kind of where I would leave it.
Yeah, this is pretty huge. And I know that a lot of the reason why you're coming forward in this way so publicly right now is to let other survivors know that they're not alone, and hopefully encourage and inspire them to stand up with everyone else who was abused either by the Music Man or by someone else within the troubled teen industry or by anyone else within the state of New York at any time. And so that's pretty incredible. And thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
And if this pathetic little half note of a Music Man is listening right now, do either of you have a message for him?
I would just say, I hope you go to bed every night living in terror like I have for the last 20 years. I hope you get up every night and check your doors to see if they're locked every night. I hope you know that the time is coming for you to answer for your actions. We may be a little late, but we're going to get what is ours.
What about you, other
Yeah,
Liz?
I'd like to add to that. And Liz Boysick, you're right. And I hope all of those things, and I'm trying to actually refrain myself from saying anything that will end up getting me in a restraining order. But if Music Man or anyone, let me just do this two parts. Music Man, if you are listening to this, for your last tissue, I just want you to know that time's up, and that your 30-year or more reign of terror is coming to an end. And the impulses that you cannot control, the punishment that you bestow upon yourself, The way you've operated, it's in a civilized society, you are nothing more than a pathetic example of a human being who abused children for your own self-serving pleasure. And you've hurt my friends. You have destroyed lives, and you can't hide forever. So I won't even wish you good luck, because there's no luck to be wished. You are going to have to answer for the crimes that you've committed against humanity and against children. And we all know your name, and you know it. And you and I had our moment 2 years ago. I'm not going to say anything more than that, but you know where I stand, and you know who you are, and you can't escape. And I'd like to say to any of the victims that may be out there listening to this, that Music Man sexually abused, that you have the power and the ability to come forward and name him, because others have named him as well. You are not going to be the first. The firsts have already gone. And that's really why the Join the Black Parade is really the tagline, because we're joining forces and coming together, and we're all stepping in line behind each other in force to call out our abusers. And if he was your abuser or one of your abusers, you have the right to name him in a court of law, and that window is closing quickly. So if you're hearing this and you were abused by Music Man, now is the time. And contact information if you need to be directed in any way, or given guidance on what to do next. iseeyousurvivor@gmail.com is your best way to get that information.
Thank you. All right. This was incredibly brave of you, Liz Boyzek. I don't have words to thank you for this. I'd love you just to wrap it up and close us out with your final message.
I just want to actually.
I'll go first. Can I go first?
Oh.
I'd like to.
So you could go first.
I would like to close it out as I'm eating cookies, not a hamburger. I would like to close it out with "fuck that guy." Okay, fuck that guy. That's it. That's all I have to say.
Fuck him.
Yeah.
Ditto.
Yeah. Ditto. And I'm Liz Boyzek, and I'm breaking code silence.
Over and out.
Thank you for sticking with us and listening to these testimonials of the Music Man from the family school in Hancock, New York. If you or anyone you know has been personally affected with sexual abuse in New York, you do have this one-time lift on the statute of limitations. Please email Liz if you need further assistance in how to litigate that. Please rate and write a review for our podcast on Apple so that other people can find us. And please share this content. Talk to people. If you're in New York and you're willing to help us, please reach out. Everything that we've been able to accomplish with the family school, with Circle of Hope, with each of these individual programs and each individual pedophile is only because of survivors and supporters uniting together against these dangerous monsters in our own backyards. And we need you now more than ever. So thank you for your allyship and your advocacy. And we look forward to seeing you on the front lines.